Hello, good day once again. Today we're going to be looking at an exciting topic in biology. But before we start up this particular topic, I would like to ask a few questions, or probably one question. And that question is, why is crop rotation referred to as one of the best farming activities in agriculture? Now, what we're going to be looking at in this aspect of biology, we're going to be looking at how agriculture is actually relevant to biology. Though they are actually similar in terms of one or two things. Biology has to do with life, and agriculture has to do with plants as well as animals. Now, how does this play a major effect in the ecosystem? So the question again is, why is crop rotation, which is one of the farming activities, usually regarded as the best farming activity, Now, I want you to understand something very important, and that is that crop rotation is referred to as the best farming activity because crop rotation actually involves the practice of planting different crops sequentially. That is, you're planting them sequentially on the same plot of land. Now, the reason for doing this is to improve soil fertility. It also has the effect of optimizing nutrients in the soil and also help to reduce the presence or the pressure of pests as well as weeds. Now, in this course of our discussion based on this particular topic, we'll look at other farming activities as well as what crop rotation is all about. But understand that crop rotation is one of the best farming activities or practices. And the reason why we said it is one of the best is because it improves soil health. It also helps to replenish nutrients in the soil and also reduce the pressure of pests as well as weeds. Now, we'll also, like I said, we'll look at other farming activities or practices. One of them that is also very good is actually mixed farming. And we're going to be looking at a whole lot of them. Now, the topic for today is simply the effects of different types of farming activities on the ecosystem. How do they have so much effect on the ecosystem? We're going to be looking at both advantages as well as the disadvantages of these farming practices. Now, before we start looking at these advantages as well as some of the disadvantages of these farming practices, I'd like us to look at the subtopics we should be considering in this class. Subtopics we'll consider in this class. Now, number one, we will be looking at the different types of farming practices. One of them we're going to be talking about is monocropping. And we're going to look at monocropping, the definition of monocropping. We're also going to be talking about the effects of monocropping on the ecosystem or in the ecosystem. We're also going to be looking at another type of farming practice, which is continuous cropping. And we're also going to be looking at the definition as well as its effect on the ecosystem. Thirdly, we'll also be looking at another type of farming activities or practices, which is called shifting cultivation. And we're going to look at the definition, and also we're going to be looking at their effects. And also we're going to be talking about crop rotation, which we have just mentioned earlier. We're going to look at the meaning of crop rotation, and then we're also going to look at how they affect the ecosystem. And then finally, like I also mentioned, mixed farming. We're also going to be looking at what mixed farming is all about, and then also how it affects the ecosystem at large. Now, also by the end of this particular class, you are expected to have a knowledge of the following specific objectives. Now, one of the specific objectives you should be able to explain or actually give an answer to is, number one, you should be able to define monocropping like we just said, and also mention some of the effects of monocropping on or in the ecosystem. And number two, you should also be able to define continuous cropping and also tell us some of the effects of continuous cropping in the ecosystem. And number three, the same on shifting cultivation. You should be able to define what shifting cultivation is and also mention some of its effects on the ecosystem. And finally, number four, you should be able to define crop rotation and also mention some of the effects of crop rotation on the ecosystem. And then for number five, you should be able to define what we call mixed farming and also mention some of the effects of mixed farming on the ecosystem. Now, these are the specific objectives you should be able to get at the end of this class or end of this topic. Now, if you're ready, let's begin with the first aspect, which has to do with monocropping. Monocropping. Now, as the term implies, mono has to do with one. So monocropping can be defined as a system of farming in which a farmer cultivates one crop. That's why it is called mono. Cultivates one crop every year on a piece of land. Cultivating one crop every year on a piece of land. If you go to some rural areas, most times people that actually do this are commercial farmers and also smallholder farmers. You go to the villages, you see some persons in their farmland, what they planted all through can be maize, okay? Can be all through in that plot of land. You just see maize is being planted, or in that particular piece of land. That is monocropping, planting just one crop every year on a piece of land. Now, some persons have plantations. Plantations can also come under monocropping. Okay, can also come under monocropping. You have some persons have a plantain plantation. You see some persons have a rubber plantation. They're only planting one particular crop in a piece of land, that is done every year, okay, in multiple seasons. Now, this monocropping, actually, it is not one of the best type of farming activities or practices. It has so much disadvantages and also it has its own advantages, but much of it is more of disadvantages. Now let's take a look at how monocropping actually affects, or the effect it has on the ecosystem, which has to do with the farmland and also how it affects the farmer at large. Now let's take a look at number one. Number one is that it provides abundant food for pests of the vastly cultivated crop. Now, if you are planting a particular crop in a piece of land, it means that, and you're doing it every year, it means that a particular pest for that kind of crop, you have actually provided abundant food for them to feast on and also to destroy. So it encourages pests. Okay, it encourages, or it leads to an increase in the population of pests in a particular farmland. And in subsequent classes, we will be looking at some of the effects of pests on crops and also on the farmland and even on the ecosystem at large. So it has a negative effect of improving, or sort of like increasing the population of pests in that particular piece of land based on cultivating just one particular crop in that same piece of land. Number two is that, like I said before, it greatly increases the population of pests. Because if there is much abundance of food in a particular place, definitely, an availability of food definitely brings about an increase in population. So if the particular crop that is being grown on that piece of land is just one, and a particular pest grazes that particular crop or feeds on that particular crop, or sort of like makes that particular crop its food, you will discover that it will bring an increase in the population of that particular pest. And number 3 is that it depletes the soil of its nutrients. It depletes the soil of its nutrients because you're doing it year after year, season after season. You keep planting the same crop. You keep planting the same crop. The crop is not actually adding anything to the soil. You keep planting the same crop. For instance, you keep planting maize. And that is why you see in such kinds of farmlands, the farmers tend to always want to apply fertilizers, always want to apply manure, compost manure to help enrich the soil. That because the reason is simple, as a particular crop is being planted on that piece of land year after year, season after season, it ends up depleting and removing or gradually wearing out the soil of its nutrients. And these are some of the effects of monocropping on the ecosystem or on a piece of land. Another thing again is that the pest reduces food and population of other animals. It reduces the food because they will feed on this food, and also sort of like creates a kind of a forum for which the population of most animals will be reduced. Why? Pests are good transmitters of diseases, and also they transmit these diseases to animals. They transmit these diseases to plants. Now, if they keep feeding on the crops, it means that, and the plants there, it means that there will be no much plants for these animals to feed from. So it also, one of the effects is that it reduces the food and also the population of other animals. The next type of farming activity we're actually going to be looking at after monocropping is continuous cropping. As the name implies, continuous is something that continues or something that persists, a type of cultivation that persists. Now, or you can say that repeats again and again. So continuous cropping can simply be defined as the repeated cultivation of crops in one area of land. Continuous cultivation of crops. Continuous cultivation of crops. Now, it is not just the planting of one crop, but you are planting crops year after year on that same piece of land. Continuous cropping. It's not just, it is quite different from monocropping. In monocropping, it has to do with just one crop on a piece of land. But in continuous cropping, it has to do with cultivation of crops, not just one, of crops on one area of land. So you can plant on that particular place, on a particular piece of land, you can plant maize. After some time, you plant something else, probably, let's say, cowpea or beans, and then next time you plant cassava, and next time you will also plant, and you're not giving space for that particular soil or that area of land to recover and replenish its lost nutrients. So that's what we call continuous cropping. And like I also said, continuous cropping is also not one of the best farming activities or practices. It has a lot of disadvantages. Now let's take a look at some of the effects of continuous cropping. The effects of continuous cropping. Now, one of them is that it reduces mineral or nutrient content, the mineral or nutrient content of the soil. It reduces the mineral or nutrient content of the soil. Now, the mineral or nutrient content has to do with elements that are found there. A soil can be rich in nitrogen, and which helps the plant in so many ways. We have magnesium. We have magnesium, which also helps plants in terms of chlorophyll, okay, to form or in the formation of chlorophyll. We have calcium. We have oxygen is necessary. We have phosphorus. We have potassium. These are essential minerals or nutrients that should remain in the soil. And in fact, for a particular crop to do well, they should be much in number. We have what we call the major nutrients, and then we have what we call the minor nutrients. Major nutrients are required by plants in large quantities. They are required by plants in large quantities. Now, if these major nutrients begin to reduce, these nutrients or minerals, they help plants for their healthy growth and development of the organs of the plants. Now, if they are reducing, it simply means it's going to affect the growth of that particular plant. So one of the effects of continuous cropping is that it reduces the mineral content of the soil. Number two effect is that it ensures the spread of germs, pests, and parasites. It ensures the spread of germs, pests, and parasite. Now, what actually brings about germs is pathogens, which can be virus, which can be bacteria, and so many others, and they are mostly transmitted by pests. Okay, they are mostly transmitted by most of these pests and some of these parasites. In our subsequent classes, we're going to be talking about pests, we're going to be talking about diseases of plants, we're going to be talking about the pests of plants, and we're also going to be talking about parasites. Like we have two types of parasites. We have the endo and the ectoparasites. We're going to be looking at the parasites of both animals as well as plants, okay? But first of all, I want you to understand this, that one of the effects of continuous cropping is to ensure the spread of germs, pests, and parasites. Number three, it results in low yield of crops. I have just explained this. Now, when the plants or when the minerals in the mineral content of the soil is reducing, definitely the growth of these plants will be affected. So it means that what you will see as the products from these crops are not going to be okay. They will be low in their yield, low in productivity. So low in productivity is one of the negative effects of continuous cropping. The next one on the line is shifting cultivation. Shifting cultivation. Now, what is actually shifting cultivation? Now, shifting cultivation is the cultivation of a piece of land for 1 or 2 years, after which it is abandoned for another. It is abandoned. You cultivate that particular land for 1 year, or you cultivate it for 2 years. After that, you allow that particular land to remain fallow. When we say fallow, you allow bushes, grasses to grow for a very long time. You leave it like that for some years also, and then you cultivate again and plant. Now, it has its advantages also, and also it has its disadvantages. For instance, you have a particular piece of land, you plant maize in the first place, or in 1 year or 2 years, and then after planting maize in 2 years, you allow that piece of land to remain fallow. You don't plant anything. You allow grasses to grow. You allow it to grow and grow and grow, and so many other things there. And you allow it for 1 year. Also allow it for sometimes also 2 years. Some persons allow it for 1 year. After 1 year, you cultivate that same piece of land and then plant another crop. Now, this type of cultivation or farming activity is actually good. It gives the plants enough time to recover, or enough time to replenish its lost nutrients, However, it also has some negative effects. Now, let's take a look at some of the effects of shifting cultivation. Now, one effect of shifting cultivation is that it wastes valuable land. That period you are allowing that particular land to remain fallow for up to a year without cultivating anything, it means you have just left that particular piece of land fallow. I mean, you've just wasted that particular piece of land that would have been used for something valuable, for something meaningful. Okay, so it wastes valuable land. Number two effect is that it destroys valuable plants and animals in the area. valuable plants and animals in the area. So if you have a valuable plant that is actually growing in that time, you have now allowed it to remain fallow, of course, and then weeds and grasses will start competing for space and nutrient with that particular plant, which might lead to the death of that particular plant. So leaving it also helps to destroy valuable plants in that area. And then also it depletes the minerals of the soil. It depletes the minerals of the soil and then also decreases the activities of useful microorganisms. It decreases the activities of useful microorganisms. Next is crop rotation. Now, crop rotation is, like I said, one of the best farming activities or practices we have in agriculture. One of the best. Now, what is actually crop rotation? Now, crop rotation is the system of farming where different crops are grown on the same piece of land year after year, year after year. Now, as you can see there on the screen, you have a particular piece of land, and then probably you divide this piece of land into 4 compartments or into 4 chambers. 4 compartments or chambers. Now, what you do is that, and usually it has to be a large piece of land. Now, what the farmer does is that after dividing into 4 chambers, in one part for a year, the farmer plants a particular crop, while the other parts or other areas are remaining fallow. Now, after he finishes from that particular plant after that year, he cultivates it, he harvests whatever it comes out from it, and allows that particular chamber or that particular part of the land, leaves it to remain fallow and moves to number 2, the second part, and then farms on it. And after 1 year, he leaves the second part and goes to the 3rd and farms on it. After farming, he moves to the 4th and farms on it. And after farming, he returns back to 1 again. Now, in so doing, the farmer is trying to help these plants to regain their nutrients, Now, there are several effects of crop rotation. Like I said, it is one of the best farming activities or practices. Now, let's take a look at some of the effects of crop rotation. Number 1, it adds valuable nutrients to the soil through legumes. Now, one of the things you plant, one of the crops that is being planted is legumes. Now, the reason for planting legumes is that legumes helps to replenish the soil. It replenishes the soil. It helps to reduce erosion. It also helps when they die, microorganisms act on them, so they add to the soil. Okay, dead remains of plants and animals, which is humus, is being added to the soil. Legumes are the plant, they are called cover crops also. They are one of the best ways you can actually reduce soil erosion. So please take note, one of the effects of crop rotation is that it adds nutrients to the soil, and mostly through legumes, through the planting of what? Legumes. Number 2 effect of crop rotation is that it controls pests associated with the soil. It controls pests that are associated with this type of soil. And I've also explained when we started earlier, I said if you're planting, probably the farmer is planting one particular crop and then moves to a different crop altogether. The pest of that first crop won't have food also to eat from or to feed from, because probably the next crop that is being planted is not palatable for it to eat, all right, for the pest to feed on. So the pest dies off, or they'll migrate to some other places and all that. So it also helps to put pests or the population of pests in control, to put it on a check. Okay, mostly pests that are associated with certain soil or crops. And then number 3 is that it maximizes the use of the land. It does not waste it. It maximizes the use of the land because the same thing is still happening in the same piece of land. Unlike shifting cultivation, where after you plant 1 or 2 years, you leave the land without doing anything on that land for 1 full year or 2 years. You don't do anything on that same land. But in terms of crop rotation, you are still working on the same land, just that the land is now divided into several compartments. Is that okay? So you're still working on the same land. So you're not abusing or you're not wasting the land. You are actually maximizing that particular land. And then number 4, like I said, it also controls erosion. The planting of cover crops helps to put erosion in check. It controls erosion. Now, quickly, let's look at the other type of farming activity, which is called mixed farming. Mixed farming. Now, mixed farming is a system of farming in which the farmer cultivates his crops and also rears animals on the same piece of land. He cultivates crops and also rears animals in the same piece or on the same piece of land. Now, when we're talking about mixed farming, it involves a land that, in fact, it involves a huge land, okay, a huge piece of land where you have some part for where you rear animals, and you also have some part where you cultivate crops. Okay, so that's why we call it mixed farming. It is mixed crops as well as animals being cultivated and reared on the same piece of land. The next thing is effects of mixed farming. Now, please note that mixed farming is also another one of the best farming activities or practices in agriculture. Now, one of the effects is that it adds nutrients to the soil through animal dung. Now, when we're talking about animal dung, we're talking about the feces that is being passed out from animals. Now, these feces that are being passed out from animals are rich in humus. They are rich in humus. They are rich in nutrients. And that's what we call manure, compost manure. When applied on a farm or on the soil, it helps to enrich the soil. It helps to enrich in the soil. Microorganisms act on these things, and that brings about humus and increases the nutrient of the soil. Increases the nutrient of the soil. And of course, you should have this idea, or you can guess properly, if the soil nutrient is improved, what do you think will happen to crop yield? Crop yield will also what? Improve. And then number 2 effect, which is actually negative, is that it causes air pollution through the smell of the dung. Of course, animal dung doesn't smell nice. Okay, it doesn't smell nice. So you find out that there was a particular place I lived, which was close to a very big farm settlement, and the smell was something else. When they apply this animal dung, the whole place gets so smelly. All right, so it doesn't have a good smell, actually. Staying close to a farm where dung is being applied on that particular piece of land. However, it has greater effects on the farmland. It has greater effects on the farmland. So one of the things it causes is air pollution. It spoils the air in terms of smell. You don't get fresh smell from the air, but a foul smell. Number 3 is that crops may be eaten by animals. This is also another disadvantage. Now, if you are not controlling the movement of these animals, it can lead to overgrazing. So the animals, instead of grazing on a particular place, might start grazing on your farmland. They might start grazing on your farmland and eating up the crops. And this is a negative issue. It's a negative effect. So it brings about crops being eaten or may be eaten by farm animals. And then also number 4 is it maximizes the use of available land. Now, in this case, the farmer is actually utilizing the whole land in a particular, maybe the farmer can divide it into several compartments where one of it can be used for cultivating crops. The other can also be used for rearing or having poultry where the farmer rears birds. Another can also be used for where the farmer rears animals or cattle, where another one can also be used for a fish farm, and so many other things. So in fact, in terms of actually maximizing the land, mixed farming is the best, far better than crop rotation, far better than shifting cultivation. So mixed farming is one of the best ways we maximize the use of available land. Maximize the use of available land. So based on all these types of farming activities and practices, like we have just mentioned, the monocropping, we have just discussed continuous cropping and shifting cultivation, as well as crop rotation and mixed farming. Which do you think is actually the best farming practice or activity? For me, I would prefer crop rotation as well as mixed farming. Crop rotation and mixed farming. In terms of mixed farming, all you just need to do is make sure you put your animals in check. Put your animals in check. So this is where we're going to call it a wrap up on this particular topic on effects of different types of farming activities on the ecosystem. But before we go, let's take a look at some questions for evaluation. Now, the first one we're going to be looking at is this. They said, which of the following is a better farming practice? A better farming practice. Now we have monocropping. Number 2, or option B, we have continuous cropping. Option C, we have crop rotation. And then option D, we have shifting cultivation. Now remember, we said that monocropping is planting one crop year in, year out, just one crop. It's like having a plantation. And then B, we said it is continuous cropping on a particular piece of land. You keep planting different crops year in, year out, no breaks. And then we also talked about shifting cultivation, where you plant a particular crop and after you leave it to fallow for several years, you come back again, you plant again the same crop, you leave it to fallow for some years, you come back again, you plant again, you leave it to fallow. And then crop rotation, where you divide a particular piece of land into several compartments and plant different types of crop year after year. Now we said that the best farming practice or activity is actually crop rotation. Crop rotation. One of the reasons is simple. It helps to control the increase in the population of pests, while monocropping, continuous cropping, and actually shifting cultivation also improves the population of pests. Now, in terms of shifting cultivation and continuous cropping, they reduce the mineral content or nutrient content of the soil, but in crop rotation, it does not reduce the mineral content of the soil. It rather improves it or increases it. So crop rotation is a better farming practice or activity. Question 2 says, which of the following practices involves the cultivation of crops and rearing of animals in a particular piece of land? Now, remember we said that was the last type of farming activity we actually looked at. We said that monocropping does not involve the rearing of animals. Continuous cropping does not involve the rearing of animals. Crop rotation, even if it is one of the best farming activities, does not involve the rearing of animals. The correct answer is D, which is mixed farming. Mixed farming. It has to do with the cultivation, so the rearing of both animals and also the cultivation of crops. And then finally, question 3. The following are effects of animal dung on farmland except. The effects of animal dung on farmland except. A says it decreases the activities of useful microorganisms. That's not true. It rather increases it. It rather increases it. Number 2 said it depletes the minerals of the soil. Also, that is not true. Option C said it destroys valuable plants and animals in the area, and that's also not true. And number 4 says it, or option D rather, says it adds nutrients to the soil. Of course, it adds nutrient to the soil. It serves as manure to the soil. Manure is also one of the ways in which we enrich the soil. So the correct answer to this particular question is option D. This is where we're going to call it a wrap up for today's class. I'm going to see you in our next class. Bye for now.